Hi, my name is Jacqueline Vijunik from the University of Oklahoma, and I'm going to talk about the High Plains Aquifer as a hyperobject. Aquifers have been in the news lately because of aquifer drawdown and increasing vulnerability under climate change. The High Plains Aquifer is no exception. It's really important as the breadbasket of the US and the world. For this talk, I'm going to think about the High Plains Aquifer as a hyperobject. We could think of those as an object-oriented ontology, and they refer to things, according to Morton, as massively distributed in time and space relative to the human experience. We could think of them as an iceberg, something that we cannot see but is potentially dangerous because we can never fully know it. There's some attributes to hyperobjects, such as the fact that they stick to things, their viscosity that they're involved with. They're non-local. They often occur across larger scales than what we could see. They temporally undulate, and there's phasing. They come in and out of touch with humans like the moon phase. Furthermore, they're interobjective. The human object understandings that we have of them are challenged. The objects themselves have agency, and this can create new brain objects. In the HPA, we argue that there are overlapping interdependent hyperobjects which have complex components that are much larger in space and time than are easily known, like the tip of an iceberg. I'm going to give this talk thinking about the three pillars of sustainability, looking at environmental, economic, and social factors of hyperobjects. So climate change is a naturally and human-influenced object. Its non-local and temporal undulation drive controversies about the mere existence of climate change itself. Its geographically differentiated phasing places pressure on the interdependence that defines sustainability. Repeatedly phased in the HPA as cyclical drought, climate change sticks to and influences other objects in the High Plains aquifer. Another object such as irrigated agriculture. As a hyperobject, the HPA is also massively distributed in space and time, yet responsive to its connection and climate change and human action. Center Pivot arrived in the 50s, expanded in the 80s due to corporatization as well as the EQIP subsidies. And the goal was really to make farmers less vulnerable to drought. However, it's led to extreme aquifer drawdown. This image of the USGS mapping of the HPA suggests significant and geographically varied drawdown. The issue with understanding the HPA is we could only partially perceive it. Mapping is based on interpolation. The actual extent, variation, and recharge is only partially understood. Sustainable adaptation is difficult then. Also in the HPA, agricultural markets are distributed globally and temporally and impacted by notable undulations or crises in the markets. The economic pressures they then exert by impacting other objects, such as crops or decisions of land use, sticks to the HPA in the form of land cover and aquifer change. These are linked to undulations in climate. Further, corn production has taken over the HPA, raising corn prices throughout the United States, influence what happens in this place, as well as the center pivot irrigation and how that influences aquifer drawdown. Linked to corn production or corn subsidies, these are bundled policies that interact with larger market forces, such as biofuel production starting in 2005 or EQIP subsidies that helped put in center pivot. And of course, risk disaster can be seen as catalyzed by drought, but also impacted by the subsidies, markets, and crops produced, and will be increasingly impacted by the lack of water and climate change. Socially, romantic ideas of the West have very important influences on understanding what's happening in the HPA. The researcher, policymakers, et cetera, these issues are so vast it can never be fully understood, with implications for the creation of new rules. Further, the complex mosaic of federal grasslands, state lands, tribal lands, diverse state surface and groundwater laws all interact in the High Plains aquifer. The rules are contained in space, yet they're highly contested and they occur in a transboundary area such as the High Plains aquifer. So how could we think of the High Plains aquifer? Maybe as an iceberg alley, or as a hyperobject, or perhaps an uber hyperobject, a confluence of hyperobjects. The phasing of environmental, economic, and social hyperobjects impact the long-term sustainability of the High Plains aquifer. We argue that these overlapping hyperobjects work to sublimate clear understandings of growing risk hazards, as our current understandings are only the tip of the iceberg in terms of risk. And the HPA, what we are left with is a potentially dangerous iceberg alley to navigate. This navigation is important not only to the HPA, but also this is the breadbasket of the US and the world. Thank you.